Welcome back, everybody. This session is to discuss the work program project. So we've got an addendum to the 2023-2025 work program for this year. And then we have to start thinking about the next 3-year cycle. The standards division have already given some thought to what might be included in that one. So I'm going to pass over to Bastian.
Thank you, Carol. So indeed, there are two items that we wanted to bring to you, one for approval and one for just an initial discussion. And only one of them is substantiated by a document, which is item number 14. This is the addendum draft project schedule. We have discussed an earlier version of this at the meeting in December. And what I wanted to do is to just quickly highlight what this represents and what the purpose of this is, also for the benefit of the new members. So when we have these 3-year GSB work programs, we have decided, actually at the very early stages of the existence of the GSB, that while we have all capabilities to look into the future, we have to be much more specific when we look at the year ahead of us, and that we want to issue specific project schedules that induce predictability for our stakeholders, that they know which projects they can expect at what point in time during a given year. So this is the idea behind the project schedule. The project schedule is added to the original work program that was approved, in this case, in early 23. And we do that on a yearly basis. So it's helpful to induce predictability, but it is also the commitment then to look towards implementation of these projects in the timelines that are given in the project schedule. And we're trying to refresh basically also the overview of projects at one point in the year in terms of new things that have come into the mix through discussions that you had at the GSB level. So in this particular case, you have a whole host of projects that have been committed in earlier years and that have been running for some time. And you have some specific ones that were actually on the agenda at this meeting. Importantly, the global systems paper, but also what was now approved to go to the supervisory board and the stakeholder council for comment, the project on the impact, risks, and opportunities. That now forms part of the project schedule for this year. In terms of changes between what we discussed in December and now, what Carol and Jeff have asked us to do is to go through the timelines for the individual projects against also the learnings from this year's implementation and most recent projections of resourcing, and lock in the major milestones for these projects in this project schedule. So that's something we've done for all the running projects, and we have also indicated for the new projects that have been added for this year how we look at the timeline. The one project that I would like to highlight, just because there is a small issue with how we have presented it here, the GI topic standard project for economic impacts, that's on page 5 of the document, item 14. We somehow in the last editing round, we missed one due process step. We're indicating that in the third quarter, there will be a public consultation on phase 1 and phase 2 of that project, but we haven't indicated that there will also have to be necessarily an approval of an exposure draft before that. So we will be adding that back into the document, so that should be happening in the third quarter as well. And then one particularity that we actually already alluded to in the earlier conversation on the project, for the guidance on impacts and risks and opportunities, The start date of the project, so the planned start of the content development is still pending resource allocation, and we're working towards that. But we can go ahead and actually move the project proposals through the due process steps that are needed now. The discussion with the board and the stakeholder council, so this will be shared with them as a next step, and we can bring it back definitely in the second quarter, and we will do that as early as possible when we have the feedback. We are also intending for this project, as Carol has signaled, to actually bring the partners on board that have indicated interest already, the Japanese Standards Board, and also the TNFD, with whom we discussed earlier, that they could form part of that project. So in the revised project proposal, that is something we would also like to cover in Signal. Other than that, I don't think there are any things that I would have to highlight. Maybe just to say that there was another item from the action points that we have from the meetings last year in terms of a paper on the options for policy adoption of the GRI standards, which we will bring for a first substantive discussion in the second quarter. Actually, if all goes well, we will bring it to you in the next meeting as an input. So that's also in here as a commitment, and this is on page 7. I don't think there are any other, I'm looking at colleagues also, there are no other clarifications, no fundamental changes to the outline here that we have presented in comparison to December.
So any comments from people and GSSB members, staff? And this is now in a really good format for reporting quarterly to the GSSB on progress on each of these matters and anything which is getting in the way of the timescales that we plan here, whether that be staff leaving, staff going on maternity leave, you know, additional resources appearing. Those are things that we can discuss on a quarterly basis and how they're impacting on the timeframes.
Yeah, we can also take that as an action into the meeting, that we will now on a quarterly basis report back to you and discuss any deviations from should they arise. But also, I think importantly, based on the discussions we had in the last 2 days, there might be the need to reprioritize within the projects. And I just wanted to highlight that what you have in front of you is basically with the current capacity that we have. This is what we can run in terms of project. You can always prioritize one project over the other, but in standard setting, that would need then 2 substantive discussions on how we pause a project or slow it down and reallocate resources that we have available, right? So that's something we will now bring back on a regular schedule to you.
Okay.
Yeah, I say, do I have the clicker? No. No, but maybe you can move us. Yeah, okay. So it is really the idea here to approve this as an addendum to the existing work program. Has no implication for the next item, the discussion of the future work.
So is everybody happy that everything that needs to be on here is on here? It includes all our action list items and so on. Yep. Okay, good. Let's approve that paper then. Thank you.
Perfect.
That's done.
The next step is then, and you will see that appearing on the GRI website, we will add this to the existing work program and it will be posted there. So when stakeholders download our work program for 23 to 25, last page will be this event. Then moving on, we have the GSB work program 26 to 28 as a major deliverable for this group over the course of the next months. And I just wanted to briefly reflect also for the benefit of the members. The majority of you were not part of such a process before. how we've gone about this in the past. That doesn't mean that we have to follow the same steps, right? There are certain due process related requirements that we have to move through, but we're free to actually develop the work program in the fashion that we want to develop it. And we really want to listen to you, what you have in terms of expectations for that process. But what we've done in the past is that there was an interaction, and today is the kickoff of that, between the GSB and the standards division in terms of looking at existing project portfolio and looking at ideas for the next 3 years of what should be covered from a standard setting perspective. And then developing, usually we've gone through rounds of drafts before we arrived at an exposure draft moment and actually moved into a public consultation. What we learned over the years is that it is very good to have some of the key stakeholders, both institutionally internal and external, involved in the steps towards an exposure draft, because otherwise you might be ending up with feedback that would fundamentally change the work program at a very late stage. So what we are envisioning right now, just from staff side, and what we're proposing, is to use the next 3 meetings that we have, May, June, and July, to substantiate the discussions, to also have that reflection on what are we committed to already and what are the priorities within the topic arena, within the sector arena, within the interoperability and collaboration space. What are the priorities that we want to set, and then add to a document that we present in the July meeting for approval by the GSB to go for exposure. In the due process, as for all things that the GSB is developing, there is the expectation to involve the other governance bodies. And also there we learned, I think the first iteration of that it is advisable to go with a first or second draft to them and invite feedback and incorporate before exposure, because otherwise it will be difficult to close the loop in a timely fashion after exposure if there is substantive feedback from them. So we're proposing to do that within the next, basically in the run-up to the July meeting, that we're also producing a draft that is of a nature that we can invite feedback formally from Carol's perspective to the chairs of the other boards as part of the process. Last thing to say about this, and then I stop, is I think we also learned that it is very important to distinguish between what you're already committed to from a standard setting perspective. That is a very important framing element, arguably, because there is limited resources and most of the projects, of course, stretch into the time horizon of the new work program. But to have a substantive discussion also about or reflection on the strategic priorities and what that would bring in new work to the table, right? And to actually front load this, because the team and Helga has done it already in her session to a certain extent, has a good view as to how the projects will move over time, the committed ones, and what would be our suggestion for prioritization. That is something we can provide in the next meetings. But today, really, your initial input on where we should be looking to develop new ideas, additions to what we're doing already, basically. I think this was all I wanted to say about this. Maybe Carol, you and any additional comments in terms of the framing of the discussion?
Not really. I saw that, you know, in your session, we talked about the importance of a work program as the North Star, but that there needs to be flexibility to bring in things that become strategically important over the course of the 3-year period, and that may not be direct standard setting work, but work that is related to the standards in the way that we engage with others. For example, this work on impacts, risks and opportunities, the global reporting system, and how to package them to regulators is are examples of the sorts of things that we've introduced this year. And that might mean then reprioritizing things. So we might need to come back and actually perhaps consciously come back in future, now that this is starting to happen and becoming more of a thing, actually come back and perhaps reprioritize some of the things that we have ahead of us in the next year. But I guess the main structure that we're looking at will be sector standards, topic standards, interoperability work, launch work, kind of thing. Yes, no?
Yes, absolutely. We would follow, I think, at least for the most part, the similar headings that we had in the last work program. But that was one of the questions that I also had to you, whether that was actually a good list to start off with. Not that we need the same headings, but that we have these buckets where we organize the content. One reflection from staff's side is certainly what we learned over the last 3 years with the work program is that we underestimated the resources that go in particular into these regulatory processes, because last time we were, I think, all thrilled by the regulatory activity, in particular in Europe, and the process that we had direct access to through the collaboration with the EFRAG and all of that, but we weren't quite, I think, on top of how much of a resource requirement that is. And one thing where we are now, we can clearly see that there are actually very many other regulators, maybe not with this similar scope in terms of regulatory ambition, but still very substantive work that are interested to actually collaborate. And that's something that will come up more ad hoc, to your point that we might have to change priorities. But generally, we will be spending more resource on this for sure. There is then also always the prioritization question, and some regulatory processes might be very interesting initially and not so interesting after some time. And so that reprioritization, if we meet quarterly, that could be part of it. For example, if we look at the technical support to regulatory processes.
Just I think the buckets question, I think was wondering. A bucket in mind to identify any future areas, for example, the ethical use of AI, robotics, I mean, you saw in several papers how some robo had been overworked apparently, and there was a huge backlash publicly, right? Okay, those topics may come up in the next 3 years, 4 years, and I don't know what those are, but maybe we have a bucket ready for that.
Just quickly respond. When you look at the current work program, we basically reserved capacity to start a new project. That didn't actually work out in the way we had planned because there was not enough capacity to take it on, and we actually worked very consciously through updating the existing standards. But in principle, that would still be the same approach that the presentation of the colleagues today is an example of one of the topics. Another one would be the discussion we had on digital last year, and prioritizing within that. This is also maybe the opportunity today, if you have items in mind that could fall under that heading, that would be interesting for us also to explore in the coming months.
Yeah, thanks very much, Bastian. And you've kind of answered a bit my question, which was obviously having come to this and seen very full work plans from the last time round, to what extent do you think you perhaps need to plan a bit more slack in the future plan? So that seems a little bit different from the prioritization. Do you know what I mean? Maybe more of a conscious effort, just perhaps bearing in mind the discussion that we've had about how the kind of political plates are changing very fast. So you probably will be under quite a lot of pressures to react in the period that we're discussing.
Yeah, what I can say about the first, I think we had 2 work programs so far, or 3 actually. But what there was always the ambition to signal that GI stands ready to do all the work that is necessary for the vision that the institution has, right? And we have, if you look at the current level of capacity that we have to implement standard setting, I would argue that the ambition in the work program has actually contributed to unlock this capacity, the resources that are needed for standard setting. Because from an external perspective, funders, from an institutional perspective, the other boards realized that that was something that was necessary. So there is a bit of duality in that. But from a staff side, we would certainly say that we have to be very realistic now about what we can deliver. In particular, also because we're reaching a point when it comes to Harold's portfolio and the topic stands where we come in closer to a moment where we've actually dealt with most of the legacy issues that GI had in terms of standards that have been sitting there as part of the system, but haven't been reviewed for a very long time. And now with the large scale portfolio projects, we're actually really catching up. There's still more to do, and Harold will present that in one of the upcoming sessions. But we're really coming to the point that the next step will be review of existing topic standards to quite some extent. So, and that should also at least put a little less pressure in principle on that element. But point taken. I think if you open up the work programs, last 3 work programs, they will always have signaled very high level of ambition. And from a resourcing perspective, we were never actually getting all the way there. Yeah.
Thank you. So where do we go from here? Do you want to tell us some of the things that you discussed in your staff meeting? Or do you want suggestions from GSSB members, or where do we start?
I think it would be interesting for us to hear a bit about what you envision. Well, we have the projects that we have, but in terms of next steps, and maybe the structure could be to think about the topic standards indeed and the sector standards, whether you have inputs and reflections that we should be considering in drafting, well, first of all, organizing the sessions on it in the next meetings, but also drafting the content. Because from the staff side, our reflection was mostly, I think, more on the mechanics of how the current project schedule moves then into the next prioritizations. And it was to quite some extent, I think, informed about the learnings of how we implement and all of that. But what we're looking for today is maybe also the novelty aspect, the things that you would be bringing to the table that we should be considering.
Well, anybody can chip in here, but I think we've already discussed the sector standards being urgent. We may need to update the universal standards as the global reporting system paper develops. There may be some update needed there. We've talked about new topic standards. There's probably some that are due for an update as well. There's updating the sector standards for new topic standards. I mean, that's the sort of regular work that we are engaged in that I guess needs to go on there. And then we can think about priorities. So if we have it on a draft program with draft due dates, we can then discuss prioritization. But people may have ideas about other things that we need to be doing other than the things already on our action list, which is getting to be quite a long list now. And we need more funding to do it all.
Yes.
So what I could suggest then is basically when we look at the next 3 meetings, between the May and the June meeting, we would come to you with an overview of how the existing project, the committed projects will actually be organized on a timeline with the estimates that we have for for how we implement currently. And then bring to you the prioritization question. So to stay in the example of the earlier discussion that we had on the sector, there are two questions prominently. One is, how many additional fully fledged sector standards do we want to commit to for the next years? And how does that interact with the likely ambition to have these interim sector resources? And where do we want one of these projects, two, however many? And what is the sequence in which we work through the 30 sectors that we currently have identified, right? So we would do that for the sector. We would do a similar thing for the topic standards, I think, in session. What I could maybe, because we didn't really discuss the topic standards at this meeting, maybe how you want to just reflect on where we are with these considerations, and then we would bring that as a paper back to you in one of the next meetings.
Yeah, because I think we just throw it a little bit on the floor here, but basically we have the update, full revision of an existing standard, because we need an updated system. We have a system having everything there. So I would say we're reaching the 31, but we have like circularity, or that part we have indigenous people, local communities. A lot of pressure, at least to people. I talk about it from a sustainable development perspective and reporting perspective. So these were already on our list. So I'm happy to give some flavor on what we get from reactions. Digitalization was already mentioned, and then it's also a question on prioritization. So I think we can have an ambition to start new projects, but being aware of what is realistic. I think that's the question to you. At this moment, at the start, 2026, 2027, at least from topics, we will need to. And next year will be a lot of publications, if everything goes well, with the labor, economics, and also the on the sector side. So 2027, 2028, end of 2027, there could be some room to start next to everything which is on the list to start some emerging things. And in our team sessions, for instance, and I want to give also this flavor, where can tell that things like, of course, the value chain. And discussion around that and how to deal with that. How can we tackle it? Do we want to tackle it? Do we want to, or should it be more guidance? It's something for another department. So there are more of these topics. Happy to bring them in a paper to give you some that you can think about it, to really have a good discussion.
Should we develop guidance for SMEs? I mean, we have GRI 3 as a starting point. Do we need to help them navigate that? And maybe have an idea of the most likely, most significant impacts for an SME, those which will help the business. And that might also tie in with the project on impacts to risks and opportunities, because one SME is not going to have a huge impact on sustainable development, but its impacts, it may be better able to think about how to incorporate those impacts and management of them into the business model and strategy. So that might be another thing.
Maybe even creating some digital tools to empower SMEs to report with a low cost. I mean, it's not going to produce the most beautiful report, but if you can walk through and select the topics, it spits out the disclosures. I mean, simple reports could be produced in that way, and this way SMEs don't have to invest in costly software to run this.
Just on the SME point, there was an action item that actually came from the discussions with the stakeholder council to look at existing programs that GI is implementing in the regions on SMEs, which among other things include actually these type of tools. So web-based tools to enable SME reporting. So one thing we could do is actually invite the colleagues that are running the projects over for one of the upcoming meetings, that you have a bit of an idea of what has been tested in the GI universe. And we could also bring in some of the colleagues that have done SME specific work. In particular, there's a process underway at the OECD that is looking at this now for quite some time already. To reflect on this. It's an interesting one. Harold was already framing, I think, so when do you start something new and how big it is such an effort. SME would be a very substantive commitment, not to say that it is not urgent but it is something we would probably have to scope together whether there's certain steps we would like to take as part of the work program or whether it is a commitment to really develop what some centers have basically and they wouldn't say that, but it's an essentially a reduced version of their standards for small and medium-sized enterprises. And we have touched upon this a couple of times in the past, and we've always decided against it for resource reason, not conceptually that we said they don't need support or anything like that. And so we could bring this discussion also back as one of the actions.
I wonder if there is a play with the CSDDD and how that, and I know everything is under reconsideration, but how that trickles down to the supply chain and what do those smaller players do, and perhaps that's where GRI can come in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is an element of that will go back to this interoperability and regulatory support discussion, because there is what's known now is that there is the VSME standard in Europe, and it will form part of whatever the solution is for value chain reporting and reporting of those companies that fall outside the scope of and that's indeed right there. It is framed as a discussion for small and medium-sized enterprises, and GI ideally has a solution to provide there.
And there's also the public sector work. And, I think it's clear that all of this work that we're talking about is urgent. It all needs to be done. And so prioritizing in some way, in some sense, and going out to consultation on priorities other than, say, how you prioritize the sectors and the individual topics, is somewhat, I guess, a bit subjective. So can we think about overlaying that with which are the ones that we're most likely to get external funding for?
Yeah, I think that goes back to the discussion in the beginning, how ambitious we were in the past and trying to basically show what GI is in principle capable of with our process and the scope of work that we take on, but then trying to find opportunities to fund it. We can, of course, use also a draft program, work program to already engage on that front. We can ask the colleagues to explore that further. For example, what was just mentioned, the SME piece is something that has come back in some of the discussions, of course, and so that could inform the decisions. Yeah.
Bastian, when you're saying it's going to come back in May, June, and July, do you mean this is all we're going to be doing for the next?
Oh no! Oh no! We wish.
So what's the plan for the different months then?
Now, well, so we have a number of things that and maybe it's actually best if Helke and Harold explain what's coming from their projects in the coming meetings up till July.
In terms of developing the work program.
No, in terms of.
Oh no, let's stick with the work program.
Okay.
What are the, you said we're going to do that.
Yeah.
We'll need to split May, June, and July.
Exactly.
What's the different phases?
Yeah. Okay, so I think the first discussion based on what we've heard today is to bring the different groupings back to you. So a discussion on the sector of prioritization, a discussion on the topic prioritization, and also a discussion around interoperability and the type of things that we feel need to be supported in the policy environment from a technical perspective. And I think we should also have a bit of a more involved discussion on the back of the project proposal that we're approving for impacts, risks, and opportunities, how we want to open up and whether we want to open up the universal standards. But it is almost, because that's a substantive update, was very significant consequence across everything we do. So these are the first four discussions that I would propose. And we would need the May and June meeting for it, because we already have a couple of other projects coming your way in terms of approval during those meetings. So this is the priority. The one question, what we could do, of course, is to invite the other boards from GRI to the meetings to give their reflections. We could also ask them to submit this in writing. We've done both in the past. We have sometimes invited the SC, for example, to bring their reflections directly to your meeting. We've also sent them, so that would be the additional layer, I think, at this stage. What I would probably advise against at the moment is to bring very many external stakeholders in addition to the discussion. That might be something for later in the year, when we have a list of ideas, and also maybe the public consultation will actually produce more ideas for new subjects. And to Harold's point, since we're not going to start them anytime soon, at least not next year, we would then have the benefit to actually have these engagements and a prioritization at a later stage on the new subjects. But I would not use the next meetings to bring very many external stakeholders to the table to argue the case for individual projects.
Okay, thank you. So what do you need from us just now then to move
I
forward?
think we have everything we need. I think we have enough to substantiate the sessions that I was describing. We were just based on the discussions we had in the last 2 days, but also earlier in the year, whether there was any particular additional item that we should be considering. And we took one for sure that we have alluded to in earlier discussions, but didn't actually ever include in the work program, the SME project. That's something we can definitely do.
Okay. Okay, so I think we can end this session then. Yeah.
Yes, I think this was what we wanted to cover in the session. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So is there any other business for the public session of this meeting? No. Okay, thank you. Then we'll close the public session. Thank you.